How are you gonna be a part of society without knowing how to read? How are you gonna learn any information without reading?
Who's ready to learn? Let me see who's ready.
Their ability to read helps them to be critical thinkers. It helps them to be responsible, to have a chance in the decision-making process of the world that we live in.
When I get angry,
Students are coming to our schools and they do not possess the skills and the knowledge needed to be able to handle grade level work.
When I first came into kindergarten, I was lost. I wasn't taught how to do guided reading.
I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. The facts are disturbing. By the end of third grade, 80% of American children living in poverty cannot read proficiently. Students not reading on grade level are 6 times as likely to drop out. The ability to read well at an early age seems linked to student achievement beyond the school years. Today, EdCast takes an in-depth look at Early Reading Matters, a program which is showing success in improving teacher quality and boosting pupil reading scores. Coming up now on EdCast. Joining me today is Lynette Guastaferro, Executive Director of Teaching Matters. She has more than 20 years of experience in education and possesses a unique blend of education, nonprofit, and private sector experience. Under her leadership, Teaching Matters has spearheaded the design of award-winning scalable teacher development models designed to improve teaching in over 700 urban schools. Welcome to EdCast, Lynette.
Thank you for having me,
so much
Linda.
for joining us. I want to begin by asking you, what is Teaching Matters and what does it do?
Teaching Matters is a nonprofit that is focused on the idea that no matter what zip code you're born into, you should have equitable access to the best teaching possible. And our work focuses on developing and retaining teachers in urban schools, specifically high needs and high needs schools that are serving kids in poverty.
So you've been giving a strong push for early reading. Why is it so important?
Early reading is really the gateway, the entryway into the rest of learning. They talk about learning to read so that you can read to learn. And that is a real, when kids get into high school and middle school and they're still struggling with reading, it just impedes all other areas. We know that kids that are not reading on grade level by third grade are 6 times more likely to drop out of school.
So that's a key marker, that
Yes.
third grade level. I know there's been a lot of talk about the impact of poverty. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen in terms of reading and poverty.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of research on this, and it's, they talk about the 30 million word gap, which is that kids coming from poverty or low socioeconomic homes have been likely to hear 30 million less words in their
Higher number than I'd heard. Wow.
That's the research. So, whether 30 million or 2 million, the point is that kids coming in that have not had the same language development, and there's lots of reasons for that. You have kids. New York is a city of many countries. So we have kids coming in from all over the world, kids speaking many languages. Many of our schools have literally 25 languages spoken. So when kids are coming in first and second grade, our teachers have a real spectrum and wide range of needs that they're that they have to address in those early years.
So if the kids are not reading successfully by the end of third grade, you've said they have a likelihood to drop out. What are some of the other negative effects that we're seeing from kids who can't read?
There's a frustration level in school that can lead to all sorts of issues. Kids that are, when kids don't feel successful, that can lead to behavior issues, and there's also lifetime. They talk about if you drop out of high school, you're more likely not to have a job. It can lead to issues of incarceration. I mean, this is a very high stakes thing to be able to have kids reading on grade level. And I'll tell you, people talk about, we need to close the reading gap by third grade, but the reality is we actually need to have kids reading on grade level by the end of first grade.
Oh, I want to get to that then in just a minute, okay, but when do we start?
Yeah.
Early Reading Matters is a program that Teaching Matters is promulgating. Tell us about it and what it's aiming to do.
So Early Reading Matters was designed to target schools that really are serving some of the poorer neighborhoods in New York. And we're targeting districts 7, 9, and 10, working collaboratively with
In the Bronx.
With superintendents. And the focus is, it's a 3-year model. So the first year is focused on developing teachers on a set of defined, we call them competencies of teaching reading. But the other component is developing teachers who can lead other teachers in the learning, because it's not as though it's a static, you could just learn to teach reading and then it's over. The work of teaching reading is collaborating with other teachers to really problem solve around what kids need. And you have to have a basic body of knowledge, but then it's just continuous improvement like any job. You'll hit different challenges every year. And so we need to develop teachers as leaders in the instruction. So that's another component. And the other piece is putting in a way of monitoring kids' reading and monitoring certain what we call school competencies, things that the leader has to put in place in schools to ensure that they're set up for success. Teachers need support systems to do this, and principals have to put those in place.
So you're looking at a multi-pronged approach
It's
here.
a deep approach, and it's approaching
so
from a lot of
there's looking
angles.
at the teachers, and we opened up with a video from your organization in which teachers say, where you say that teachers really are not always prepared to teach reading.
Right.
And you're also looking at the administration of schools, and you're looking at how we can actually help kids improve their reading. So it all seems to work together. So
Yes.
let's go back to the teachers for a minute, all right? What is that professional development like?
So we have, there's two,
How do you become a better reading teacher, I guess?
How to become a reader. Well, one is really clear definitions around, like, well, what are core sets of practices and skills that teachers have to master? That's the basic. It's sort of, and practicing them. So it's not a case of, we have institutes where the teachers come and they learn them, but nobody believes that that's how teachers learn. That's just how we front load and demonstrate. The most important part is the practice. And so I think the key piece is that when they return to their schools, and we have a coach who is someone who has successfully closed the reading gap in their own work, who is doing what we call cycles with those teachers. So they're practicing it. We observe, we're giving them feedback into that. And more importantly, not only are we doing it, but we're developing other teachers in the school. If a teacher's mastered that practice, that teacher is then positioned to help other teachers. And that's really critical because we want to build capacity.
Now, this is begging the question a little bit about our teacher education programs. Our teachers are graduating from teacher ed programs. Are they not getting the preparation, the correct preparation there?
Well, let me give you a two-pronged answer. First of all, teaching reading is one of the most complex and I think difficult things that you can do in education. I don't think people don't.
Why?
Because reading is very complex. If a child is, some children honestly do just pick up reading. You read to them, they seem to pick it up magically. But there's a group, it's at least 1 out of 3 in the general population, that you're going to have to diagnose that needs special intervention, and they have to be taught reading. Brains have evolved over centuries, and we actually didn't evolve to read. Surprise, surprise. So some of us are more able to read than others, and there are very specific, and I was one of them, frankly. I myself did not learn to read, and I think till I was in the middle of 1st grade. And that was because I had to be taught phonics really specifically. And so my teachers had to be able to diagnose what was I able to do, what was I not able to be able to do, and then be able to attack it. So you'd say, fine, you can learn that in ed school. But the reality is and this is an issue with all teacher preparation in the United States, is that we don't prepare teachers the way we prepare doctors. So we have ed school, you learn a lot about what you need to do to be a doctor, but no one would then put you in a hospital and say, here, your patient, see ya. And that's what we do in education. So we believe that there has to be a real clinical practice, and reading amongst anything is something you learn by doing. So in our schools, especially in high poverty urban schools, is you do have more new teachers and young teachers coming in. And if you set the school up where it's super clear about what are the skills around reading, it's very transparent, the principals, the assistant principals, the lead teachers have sets of look-fors for each, and people are collaborating to learn together. If I'm a new teacher coming into that building, my question to that new teacher is there a clear systematic approach to teaching reading in this building, and do you understand it? And in our schools, after a year, those new teachers will say yes.
Okay, so there is a systematic approach. And when the teachers come into the field and do their practice, you mentioned the coach. Is that akin to the apprentice model? That's sort of like having someone
Yes.
with you on site? That tends to be the new thinking about teacher professional development in general,
Yes.
that we should be looking toward this apprentice model, whereas you just said, like going to medical school where you go out
Absolutely.
and you put it into practice. I want to go, of course, I think I read in some of your literature that you stay in schools for 3 years, or that you work with the school for 3 years. Is 3 years a kind of magic number, and why?
So 3 years, we set goals for every year, and the first goal is around really developing knowledge around the competencies in the building. And now, in some schools that takes, in other schools it takes longer, but that's the goal for the first year. The second thing we're doing the first year is make sure that school is systematically looking at kids' reading levels across the building, across the grade, and that the teachers really understand how to assess kids and know where they are. And that is a big, big, big push of the first year. The second year is when we start to say which of the teachers can really lead on this work. We actually start the first year, but the second year is when we really do that push, and we develop those teachers to begin to lead other teachers. And the third year is about sustainability, because it's not about us being in that school, it's about that school being able to do that on their own with their own leadership, and that's what the third year is. It's just about sustaining the practice.
So you have a set 3-year program. I have talked about the elephant in the room, and that is teacher turnover. It's no secret that there's a very high rate of teacher turnover at higher and struggling schools. Of course, let's talk a little bit about why is there such high teacher turnover in general? Why is it worse in a struggling school? And what does it say, and what can we do?
Well, so let me start from the big picture. I mean, we have a taxation system in our country, which there is actually, I mean, we have our teachers in the Bronx, a hop, skip, and a jump from Westchester, which is able to offer teachers significantly more pay for what you can arguably say is the same or potentially not as difficult a job.
Okay, so there's a bad salary.
That's number one.
Okay.
And specifically for New York, I think that's particular. It's the salary. It's not just the salary, it's the comparative salaries in close geographies.
Okay, sure.
So we pay teachers more to teach kids that are wealthier than we pay teachers to teach kids in poverty, and that's number one. The second issue of turnover, I believe, is that the teaching role has to, millennials especially coming in, everyone in the private sector talks about how do we engage our new workforce, right? Because they're online, they can see lots of opportunities, they hop, skip, and jump. Everyone's got everybody has a retention issue right now. It's not just education. And so they have to be engaged. They have to be moved into leadership roles. And so, in the teaching profession now, there's a lot of look at what we call teacher leadership. How can you keep your foot in the classroom but still have leadership roles in the building? And if you sort of heard in our model, that's implicit. So we're not just talking about how you're going to be teaching reading, but how are you going to be leading teachers learning on reading as quickly as possible? Because what we know is that our teachers coming in, they want roles of responsibility fairly quickly. They want to, in 2 to 3 years, they want to see that kind of being able to kind of co-partner with another and have some autonomy in the work.
I think the fact that they often want to get, I remember the Teach for America problem was that so many of their teachers quickly exited the classroom to become administrators. Everyone was an administrator, nobody wanted to be in the classroom. So you have a lot of things going on. You also have, in my mind, the high stakes testing environment and a new teacher who enters the field. And we know that many of our highest poverty schools have many new teachers rather than experienced teachers. What do we do with a new teacher? Where should a new teacher ideally be placed? In this K through 12, in this K through 3 continuum?
Right, or in that.
Where would you put a new teacher and why?
Well, so I've actually had a number of conversations with some of our more successful principals about that question, because there is this very difficult choice that a principal faces. They have this high stakes accountability in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade.
And that's the testing.
That's the testing, right? So, and they're going to look at that 4th grade and say the scores dropped. Well, who's teaching and what do I do? And because it always falls on the teacher. I don't care what anybody says. It's always their fault. So, and then they have K1 too, which they don't have the high stakes assessment, but what we do know is that for children, K1-2 is the high stakes. It's the high stakes of their life. It is the place we have to put the most skilled teachers, because once they fall behind, the statistical chance of catching up is incredibly low. So we have principals that are faced with this really difficult choice, and I understand it very, very well. So when I ask principals, so how do you do this? Some of them are very creative. So one way of bringing a new teacher into a school is, I'm not sure if your viewers will know this, but there's a model of teaching. We have many special ed and English language learners, kids in schools. So there's a model called ICT. It's kind of co-teaching model. One teacher is a special ed teacher, one teacher is the regular ed teacher. Right. So I've heard that a lot of principals will bring a new teacher into that room, so there's a natural mentoring. Now, that shouldn't have to be done that way. It should just happen. There should be a year of clinical practice, but these principals are getting smart about figuring out ways to do that so that that new teacher does have a more experienced teacher in the room that can help them in that year where they really get their sea legs and learn their craft.
And so they don't get discouraged. I mean, I think what often happens is as soon as a teacher gets some experience, they leave, or many go out and do something else, or they leave these particular schools because it's hard.
I mean, I've seen it, you know, there's the other piece about teaching in urban schools is it's a mission, it's a calling. Like you really, you can do so much good and you can really have such an impact. Not that every teacher has an impact, but I mean, I taught in Baltimore City, and you know, that was what brought me to the work, was because you know, you knew that a great teacher has an enormous impact potentially in a high poverty school. It's really a chance of a lifetime to make a huge difference for kids.
We should pay them a lot more than we
pay
people
don't get me
who just
started.
generate
Don't get me started.
Money for other people. How about showing? How about putting our money where our values are?
Exactly.
I mean, that's just my own particular thing. So I want to go back to looking at what teachers need to know and what students, you know, I cannot have a reading specialist sit here with me today and not talk about how are we teaching reading today. I know there was whole language many years ago. Then there was phonics. Then there's the combination.
Right.
How are we?
Where are we?
Where are we?
Where are we in the reading wars?
So
I think the reading wars have been. There's always a new reading war. There's a few going on right now, but that particular
so many
reading
other wars
war.
going on right
now.
now.
And there's unfortunately, I like to keep my head on the reading war. It's so the whole language versus phonics has settled into something we call balanced literacy.
Okay.
And the reality is kids need to have a combination of specific and explicit, phonemic word work, vocabulary. All of those basics have to be done, and they have to be done systematically, and they have to be done through sort of a research-based kinds of programs. But at the same time, we don't want to fall into the trap where kids in poverty are taught phonics all day. Right. And that happens. Okay, that is an absolute reality. If our students are not given rich texts that they really have to engage in and break down and think, they are absolutely not going to be prepared for their futures. And so it's a combination of the two. And it has to happen starting from kindergarten all the way through. In kindergarten, you do have to make sure that you're really explicitly making sure kids leave kindergarten with the letter recognition, the ability to sound, the ability to break, be able to read, and basic building blocks and foundation of reading. But you also in kindergarten do need to start introducing, rich text. That's why we teach. Our model has kids working. So the big thing that we help teachers understand is how to assess kids at a particular level, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. At a particular level in our program, we've created a set of what we call I can statements. They're reading behaviors that the teacher can understand, that the child can understand, and that the parent can understand.
And that's how you know that the child is on level. I was just going to ask you that, because you say by the end of 3rd grade you want a proficient reader. Right. So what are the warning signs, or what are the milestones that you want to see? You mentioned kindergarten, and can we talk about pre-K? Is that part of this continuum in some way?
So we're not. We are using, so it's not us. Most teachers in New York City have an assessment system that's based on what's called Fountas and Parental, and kids are, the teacher works one-on-one and assesses a child and sees exactly what level they're at. And that's by listening to the child read and asking the child questions, and then based on that, they're given a level. And that's a really nice way to organize the classroom, because if I have a group of kids who are, quote, at a level C, then I can tell, well, where is this child? First of all, while kids might be behind, you have to understand, we have to understand that kids are developing at all different rates in those early years. And so the point is to have a system that does allow us to have kids grow in reading so that it's not lockstep.
Okay.
And that's really important.
So I have a 5-year-old. I have a friend who has a 5-year-old. Okay. She's worried, is her son on level.
And he's in kindergarten.
Kindergarten. So what do you want to see a kindergartner know how to do by the end of kindergarten to feel that they're going to be proficient by 3rd grade? What do we want to see?
We definitely want kids to have, letter recognition. They should be able to sound out, some basic words. They should be able to, they should be super excited about books. Let me start with that. It is really important that kids are just excited about books and that parents are reading to them. So my advice to someone who has a 5-year-old is that they should be reading to that child 15 minutes minimum a night.
15 minutes
minimum
okay.
a night. And that is actually, that's a worldwide, there's been research done worldwide that the one thing we can do for our children is to read to them for 15 minutes of a night. It has a huge impact on their future earning. So if you want to raise your kid's salary, start reading to your child 15 minutes a night. It's really, really important. And if, as a kindergarten teacher, I would, I'm working with my kids, but the other thing I would do as a kindergarten teacher is model for parents, how do you read to your child?
Oh, interesting.
And there's, some simple things. It's not just reading, it's asking some questions about the book. And it's not just, is that a dog? It's like, what did the dog do? Why did the dog do that? We have to ask those
what
questions.
What might happen next?
What's going to happen next? And it's actually any parent who is able to read in their native language and not everybody can. So that's the, I don't want to sort of, I've said this before, and you have parents who, my own father, for example, my father was an immigrant and when my father, he had a very strong accent. He'd read to me in his book Italian, and I really couldn't stand those. He drove me, I couldn't listen to him to read it. It made me nuts. My mom's English, so she would read. But so my father really wasn't able to read to me in a way. So what I would say is you have to find someone or work with someone to have your child read to. It's imperative, and that's what parents can do when their kids are 5.
My only concern when I listen to people talk about reading and the early grades, are we
turning
forgetting
kindergarten
about play?
into 1st grade?
Right? Are we turning? Is there room for play in the curriculum? And just quickly, where might that be, or should it be out? I mean, look,
No.
some pre-K programs seem to have no toys in the room practically.
So one of the good news is vocabulary development. Remember I talked about this word again. Vocabulary development is actually one of the most important things that we're doing in kindergarten, developing kids' words, and that can be done through play beautifully. Okay. That's a great, and you are right to be concerned about that, because we do have issues where kids who are not really ready for that kind of deeper reading get frustrated, and we're seeing issues later. So what we have to do, again, that's why we have to have levels for kids. And it's not the whole kindergarten, but we also have to realize that we have kids coming in that haven't had enough book exposure. So I would say that in communities, especially where you may not have 100 books at home, kindergarten's got to start. They have to do those things. It's imperative. But it is a balancing act. We cannot have kids miserable and boring. That's why I say they have to love the books. If your kids in kindergarten are hating the books,
not good.
You've got to rethink it.
I'm embarrassed to say that in kindergarten I played in the gender-specified dollhouse and didn't learn how to read till 1st grade. I just want to know, wasn't even attempting to read till 1st grade. Okay, so we only have a minute left. I want to ask you quickly, early reading matters. What kind of measures of success are you having? How do you know you're being successful?
How are we being successful? So we have had, there's a 50% increase in our 1st and 2nd graders right now from the beginning to the end of the year of kids that are reading on level as measured by our Fountas and Parental, and that's a really big statistic for us. So that's our measure, is are we moving the kids based on that?
So you're seeing some success and your program is scalable. We are going to go out by listening to the voices of some of your young readers and hear what they have to say about reading. So we're going to listen to that, and then don't go away, because we will be back with our Ed Bites. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Lynette Guastaferro.
Your reading is like it's going on in your brain. You can feel what it's doing. It's like you're in the book, but just reading the words that the characters are saying. It's like a play that entertains you. I do love learning.
Words are the windows to our world. Knowledge really is power.
Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites. Education Week reports that while reading scores are rising around the world, the U.S. is an exception. In the latest Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, or PEARLS, U.S. 4th graders came in at number 16 in international rankings. They perform significantly worse on tasks that require them to read to find and use information and to make inferences. Peggy Carr, the acting commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics, noted, "We seem to be declining as other systems improve. There is a lot to be concerned about." And there's more international testing news that's worrisome. PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, measured the performance of 15-year-olds around the world to see how well they work with one another to solve problems. Singapore and Japan scored in first and second place. Hong Kong pupils came in third. But the U.S. ranked number 13 in the collaborative problem-solving test. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which conducts the assessment, observed that our more globalized world makes it important for pupils to develop social and collaborative skills. With increasingly diverse classrooms, teachers are confronted with students from a variety of cultures with names they may have trouble pronouncing. So how important is it to say a student's name correctly? Research says very. EdWeek reports that students' socio-emotional well-being can be negatively affected by failure to pronounce their names correctly. Educator Jennifer Gonzalez, the creator of the website Cult of Pedagogy, says, "Mutilating someone's name is a tiny act of bigotry." And the National Education Association reports that minimizing the significance of getting a name right is a kind of microaggression or everyday act of discrimination. Maybe this is something we should all keep in mind. Facebook recently announced its new app for kids. This seems like a natural next step since kids are increasingly using media and technology. Today, 42% of young children have a tablet, compared to 1% in 2011. The research from Common Sense also saw an increase in the amount of time children spend with mobile devices, 48 minutes, up from just 5 minutes in 2011. Maybe it's time to pull out a board game, which can teach problem solving, math skills, and even cooperation. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Till next time, class dismissed.